Hello and welcome to week 5. We're going to continue talking about direct behavioral assessment. Recall this is also called descriptive assessment, and this is a way of trying to understand the variable or variables that are affecting target behaviors by simply directly observing the behavior. We talked last week about some of the strengths and limitations of these descriptive assessments, and these two articles that you're going to read this week, Touchette's and Thompson and Awada's, are good examples of both of those. One is it's simple to observe, but two is you have the problems of correlational data. Because you're only observing, you're not manipulating anything, you could get an observation that is misleading. For example, if you're observing someone who is engaging in physical aggression, most likely staff are going to respond to that. So when you're doing a direct behavioral assessment or a descriptive assessment, you're going to record that that particular target behavior, aggression, was followed by attention. Now, does that mean that it's maintained by attention? Well, not necessarily. It might, but it might just be that the attention is there because, well, if an individual is physically aggressive or engaging in property destruction that's dangerous or engaging in dangerous SIB, staff are probably going to get involved. And they need to in order to make sure that everybody is safe. So that's one of the problems we talked about last week, and you are going to continue to see with these two studies. Now, that doesn't mean that descriptive assessments or direct behavioral assessments are useless. To the contrary, they can be very useful, but they do have a disadvantage. So let's start talking about them. The first one that you're going to read by Touchette is a little different. It's Touchette is focusing on scatter plots. So where typically we might look at data over time, over days, weeks, could be months, some cases even longer. Touchette's point is, well, you may miss something. You may miss an opportunity to understand why this behavior is occurring if you don't look at small patterns within a day or within a short period of time. So theoretically, these scatter plots, by simply just recording the time, the temporal parameters, the time that the behavior occurs, you may theoretically identify periods of time in which the problem responding virtually never occurs, or periods of time in which it almost always occurs. So let's look at some examples. All right, here's Jones from the Touchette article. Now, you look at Jones and, yeah, right here, between like 1 and 4, it looks like these are hours of the day. This is, the dark circles are when the behavior is occurring. Okay, I get it. That looks pretty clear to me. Something's going on between 1 and 4 that is resulting in more of her targeted behavior. Now, Touchette says that they hypothesized that the activities that were associated with those times between 1 and 4 were the culprit. Now, that's great, but typically it could be anything else. Again, these are correlational. So now we know there's more target behaviors, in Jones' case it was aggression, that was occurring during 1 and 4. But we don't know why. Now, one difference apparently is that there's different activities going on, but there could be other things going on. Maybe it's noisier between 1 and 4. Maybe it's the bell that goes off during that time. Maybe there's a different teacher that's coming in and out of the room. So the point is, there's a limitless number of other things that can go on. But what Touchette does in these studies is he demonstrates a functional relationship, so he addresses that correlational problem, and that is important. So, for example, he then revised the program. So he took out the activities that were associated with 1 to 4, gradually introduced them over time, and sure enough, the aggression in Jones' case dissipated. So he demonstrated was attempting to demonstrate a functional relationship, although this one's really only an AB. Here's a better example of a functional relationship with Tom. Tom's data, whoa, very clear. Afternoon, tons of SIB. In the morning, very little. So they hypothesized that it had to do with staff person. Once again, yes, it could be the staff that are in the afternoon versus the day, but it could have also be 100 other things. But they did a reversal. They demonstrated a functional relationship, so they addressed very clearly that problem of a correlational study. So they reversed the staff, put the bad staff in the morning, and we see SIB only in the morning, not in the afternoon, then reversed the bad staff back into the afternoon, and we see SIB in the afternoon, but not in the morning. So clearly demonstrating that it was a staff issue. All right, finally, we have, this is personally my experience with scatter plots when I've tried to use them. This is what I see, which is the initial results of Jim, which is it's all over the place and there isn't a clear temporal pattern. However, they say that once they revised his schedule from unstructured to more structured, a pattern emerged, and that, again, they hypothesized it was related to his schedule, so they just revised his evening schedule to resemble his morning schedule. So here's what they did. They added in structure, and sure enough, now you start to see a temporal pattern. You see in the afternoons he's engaging in the target behaviors, but not in the morning. Then they made a modification and addressed it. So I think the take-home point with these scatter plots is that if you can identify a temporal pattern, and my own experience is it's not quite as easy as this, but if you can, that's great. But typically people just stop and then they don't do anything about it, and you have the problems of correlational studies. So the one that was done with the one individual where he actually did a reversal, he really demonstrated a functional relationship by taking out the staff, moving the staff from morning to afternoon. And in that case, he actually demonstrated. Otherwise, you still have the problems of correlational studies, and even though you might have a pattern, you don't know what it is until you demonstrate control that is actually affecting it. So when you do your critique and review of Touchette's article for me this week, I'll be interested, put in your own experiences if you've done. I know a lot of people have done scatter plots in the past, and if you have done one, I'd be interested to hear what your experiences were. All right, the second article I think is very interesting by Thompson and Awada. To repeat again, because it's important, the reason we do this, the reason we do these assessments and these descriptive assessments is we want to observe the behavior so that we can understand it. And once we understand it, then we can affect treatments that are based upon the results of that assessment. That is, in the nutshell, what a behavioral assessment is. So Thompson and Awada asked this very interesting question, which is, well, yeah, so we observe, we do these descriptive assessments, we ask questions, we do indirect behavioral assessments, we do direct ones where we actually observe, we do functional analyses, which we'll be talking about in the next few weeks, where we actually manipulate the environment in order to better understand a behavior. We do all of that, but do we really know that out in the natural world, in the real world, that people actually are attending to maladaptive or undesirable behaviors, that people are actually escaping demands as a result of their undesired behavior? Are they actually getting access to desirable tangibles based on the maladaptive behavior? Great question. And so Thompson and Awada went about doing it by simply observing, well, it wasn't simple, but observing, doing a descriptive assessment of 27 adults with intellectual disabilities living in group homes. So essentially, they just did this. They just went out to the group homes with their little data sheets and that recorded staff behavior and individual behavior. So they'd be watching, for example, individual Tom, and they're watching Tom, and Tom engages in SIB, and then they record within a minimum amount of time, does staff have some consequence? Do they attend to him? Do they allow him to escape a demand? Has he escaped a demand? Is he getting some kind of tangible item? So the results, pretty straightforward in the sense that attention, escape, and access to tangibles were observed following problem behaviors under naturalistic conditions. Attention was observed to occur in about 90% of the individuals. So this means at some point, not of course every time, but 90% of the individuals who engaged in problem behavior, at least once in a while, that problem behavior was followed by attention. As we know, that may be enough to maintain that behavior. 2 is escape also of demands was followed by problem behavior in 36% of the individuals, and tangibles, access to tangibles in 30%. So yes, a simple yes to the first question, do these things occur in nature? The million-dollar question that they talk about is how frequently do these things have to happen? How often do you have to get attention following a problem behavior before you're reinforcing it? Another aspect of these data, and I'm just going over these to help, because some of this gets confusing, particularly when they're talking about conditional probabilities, that there was a lot of variability. These are the individual data. Here's the 27 individuals, and you see a tremendous amount of variability. You know, look at participant number 4, for example. They had a conditional probability of 77%, which means 77% of the time that a problem behavior occurred, it was followed by attention. It's pretty darn high. On the other hand, no occurrences of problem behavior were followed by escaping a demand or a tangible item. On the other hand, if we look at individual 14, 26% of their problem behavior was followed by attention, whereas 80% was followed by escaping a demand and 10% by access to a tangible, desirable tangible. So they were sort of all over the place in terms of variability, as you would expect, because we know not everybody engages in a target behavior for the same reason. So this is not surprising, but it makes, when you're aggregating these data and putting them together the way they do, it makes it a little more difficult and challenging to try to explain the data. Let me go back and talk about the conditional probabilities, though, again, just to remind you of what those are. It's not as complicated as it sounds. It really, the conditional probability of each consequent event, that is either attention, escape, or tangible, given the occurrence of the problem behavior, was determined by dividing the number of intervals containing problem behavior followed by each specific consequent event. So, for example, if let's take in participant 15. Participant 15 had 15 participant 15 had 10 intervals of problem behavior. And 6 of those were followed by attention. Therefore, his conditional probability, or hers, I don't know what gender participant 15 is, their conditional probability is 0.6. 6 divided by 10. So it's pretty straightforward. Okay? If you have questions about that or really anything else about these articles, put them in the discussion forum, and so everyone can see them, and I will try to answer them as soon as I can, or at least I'll answer them at our next face-to-face class. Okay, and then finally, these data, this is figure 2 from their study, show that aggression and SIB were most likely to be followed by attention and escape. So aggression and SIB, were most likely to be followed by attention and then escape after that. Now, this is where I think Thompson and Iwata do a nice job of trying to explain what these data mean, but this is where, again, we run into this problem of these descriptive data, as interesting as they are, there's clearly value to them. They are, all they really can do is tell us that they're correlational. They can just tell us about correlations, that there is a correlation between aggression and staff attention. That doesn't necessarily mean that attention is what's maintaining it. It could, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. So they do a nice job of talking about all of those variables, but I think those are some of the challenges of interpreting these kinds of data, and one of the reasons I wanted you to read this article. So for this week, read the Touchette and Thompson articles in detail, and then submit an article summary and critique, just like you did for me last semester. I've included a copy in the on-site Blackboard, and do a quick summary. I'm interested in the critiques. I'm also interested in the summary for each of them, and then bring them to our next face-to-face class, and we'll talk a little bit about that first thing in the morning. If you have any questions, as usual, put them in the discussion format. Have a good week, and I will see you next week.